This will be lesson 2, the first chat of lesson 2, and some of the basic units of emotion. You'll recall that the goal of this series is the liberation of soul. The goal is soul, and that means what returns us to the beautiful parts of our personality that we had when we were natural children, infants. But of course, we know that there were wounds early on in our clients, my wife and I, when we work with people, we would find, my gosh, that there were burns on their arms due to cigarette, thoughtless, sadistic parent putting out a cigarette on their arm. So we want to return to what's beautiful within us, our natural child. Now, one of the claims I have made is that what I'm talking about is empirical. That means it's based on observable data that you can see, hear, touch, smell almost, in terms of people. And there are some serious illnesses, as you can tell by smell, I might say. But that goes off on a tangent. I am not interested, nor is my wife interested, in creating an ice igloo of thought, marvelous thought. Because in my study of the history of philosophy and the history of theology and the history itself, it's laden with people who create these ice igloos that then later people find can be moved to Africa and are melted and really add nothing to the redemptive work of helping people in terms of their soul. But I say, and my claim is in these lectures, that liberation psychiatry, liberation psychotherapy can be validated by people who will take the time to observe. Now, the observation is really minute, particular, exact. And so it means a person has to look at humans in a new and analytical manner. So we encourage you to check each observations, and later on I'll be teaching how to observe. In fact, I'll go into that in the next chat. But right now I want to talk about the basic units of emotion. As I go back in the history of philosophy, everything is masked therapeutically, metaphorically. It's like they will put it in theological language or abstract philosophical terms. This went on in the history of philosophy until the 17th century, and a man by the name of Baruch Spinoza came along. And he was a lens grinder, but he was a very intelligent and perceptive human, and he talked about emotions. Now, in my study, I kept running into, in philosophy and theology, these ice igloos. And one of the things that people would do is when their thinking was getting into an impasse, they would bring in God and say, now God solved this, da-da-da, perfection of God, and our job is to be dutiful and love God. The interpretation of the soul was also done that way. So instead of taking the original Greek meaning of essence, morality, mind, consciousness, sense of right and wrong that we have, they talked about the soul as something that goes up in the sky to God. And that really began with Plato. Now, I don't want to get off on these ice igloos of thought that melt in the harsh sun of human examination, but I found that interesting that it took to the 17th century before somebody started talking about emotions. Emotions that are very particular, and you can look at them, you can hear them, you can see them on people's face. Now, in our time, we see videos every evening of what's going on in Somalia, Israel, Beirut, Syria, where we can see the raw emotions occurring. And of course the camera just goes real rapidly and you don't get to observe very well. We teach observation. Now, Charles Darwin was one of the greatest observers of all time, if not the greatest. He wrote a book called The Expression of Emotions in Men and Animals. Following his theory, following with exact documentation, he showed muscles in our face and muscles around our eyes that are the same as they are in chimps, monkeys, and that they had certain reactions. Now, as I went through his book, and he has some wonderful stuff in there, but reading Darwin is a little dry. It doesn't have the excitement of some of modern literature, the great use of adjectives. He wasn't doing that. He was a scientist. And so he just recorded musculature. He took off of, he had diagrams, pictures in his book, that he shows the exact muscles that chimps have that we have. But he did some beautiful stuff. For instance, he talked about tenderness in one chapter. But when he got down to it, he boiled it down to 7 emotions. 7 emotions that are now talked about in our time by Dr. Paul Ekman, E-K-A-M-A-N. He included surprise and disgust. Charles Darwin did, as does Ekman. And I would look at those and think, you know, that is true. None of us wants to encounter disgust and be shamed, humiliated. That's something that we're scared of. We don't like it. But I couldn't figure out how to use disgust in dealing with my clients. And I also noticed that Darwin talked about surprise. And yes, we don't like to be startled. And yes, we have reactions that are similar to the apes. We do the same muscles. And with disgust, for instance, Darwin says it's like smelling dead meat. And we do up our face, oh my God, you know, oh my, you're disgusting. Now, none of us want to be treated that way. And sure enough, that is a source of some traumas, where a mother or a father treats a kid as nothing. And so that beautiful soul that Dr. Paul Bloom and his wife talk about in the book Just Babies gets lost. Well, it was really the creator of talk therapy, Dr. Sigmund Freud, in the 20th century, who started talking about emotions. Now, when he was my age, he wrote this book, The Problem of Anxiety, and over near the end, he's quite clear about that psychoanalysis, his system, some of which is an igloo of ice, simply has never learned about emotions. In fact, he ends the book talking about that there's a lot of work to be done on emotions. Now, my wife, Dixka Scheidel-Morris, had a separate therapy practice before we got married, and I had a separate therapy practice. And we had run into a man by the name of Fritz Perls, Dr. Friedrich Perls, who had boiled down to the best 4 emotions that you could use in therapy. The work of healing when somebody's got a wounded soul. You needed to point attention to when they were sad, when they were mad, when they were glad, and when they were scared. Now, when my wife in her separate practice and I in my separate practice used Pearl's system, mad, sad, glad, scared, we were startled that our clients advanced more, they changed more, they came to greater self-awareness, they were more strong in their identities, they were better in terms of relationships. So when we married almost 40 years ago, we would use sad, mad, glad, scared with clients. And then my wife, quite perceptively, said that, you know, a lot of emotional difficulty comes because people don't understand tenderness. They don't know how to be tender and loving with a baby. They don't know how to be tender and loving with their partner. They don't know how to be tender and loving with the inner child of everyone they meet. The soul, yeah, it's wounds out there, but how can you be tender and loving, kind, considerate, compassionate, empathic? And so we began to add that to Pearl's scheme, and tender. And then, since I had taken quite seriously Eric Berne's functional analysis, which I've spoken of earlier, I kept thinking about the natural child, that's one thing we wanted to renew in people. And tenderness brings off more nurturing. Tenderness is in the baby. If you've ever watched infants in a place, they will touch each other so softly and loving. And so I thought more and more about the natural child. I said, you know, one thing that's missing in this emotional scheme that we now have 5 is excitement. Where is Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, Handel's Hallelujah chorus? Where is the soaring music that talks about something that's very desirable? Where is there just loose, spontaneous play? And so I said, we need to add excitement so that we have 6 terms: sad, angry, scared, happy, excited, tender. 6 emotions. And we will begin to base, I don't know that I said it, by the way, my wife may have said, we're going to begin to ask questions along these lines, and they're sad, angry, scared, happy, excited, tender. And we call it Sashay. Sad, angry, scared, happy, excited, tender. Sashay. And once again, we saw great improvement in our clients. Now, let's just take tenderness. We found that tenderness may come before anger. Scare may come before anger. Very frequently those will come before anger. And so if we could move our clients by questioning, what were you scared of? Or how are you fearing in terms of your love of that person? We made greater advances. They had more insight. They would quit these wild anger episodes. Now I recall that since I was a minister for a dozen or so years, I recall this man who told me that his son would spontaneously run out in the street. And he said, finally, I just told him to get back in the yard, and I stood on the curb and said, run in the street. And when he did, he said, I would hit him and knock him down. And he would start crying. I said, get up and go back in the yard and run in the street. And I would hit him and knock him down. He said, I did that until the boy just couldn't go back in the yard and run into the street. And he said, my son is 40. And I will see when he goes out to his car that he will stop when he comes to the curbing. And here was this father on the south side of Chicago who thought anybody would say, this is a brutal son of a gun. But it was coming out of love. And by the way, in that little illustration, there is a hint as to why people do things and the pathology of humans, what makes their adaptations occur. Well, I want to say that sad, angry, scared, happy, excited, tender forms the basic units of psychotherapy. No discipline can occur without having basic units. No scientific discipline. Otherwise, we're off on opinion. We're building an ice igloo. So the first observation that needs to be made by people is going to the basic units of emotion. When people are sad, how you can be with them. When they are angry and destroy a relationship, what can you do about it? When they are scared, and what do they fantasize? When are they happy? A very desirable emotion. When are they excited? And when they are tender. Now I'm going to end about here, but I will say that it's difficult in doing the observation that we ask to ask these questions of people. You can be with them in ordinary society, but one of the ways you can verify what I'm talking about is look at very mentally healthy people. Do they know how to go ahead and cry when there's a great tragedy, like you see in Syria or Beirut or Israel or the Sudan? Do they know how to be angry when their integrity has been knocked, when somebody kills one of their children? Do they know how to admit to scare, which some religions will basically say you shouldn't have any scare, but the fact is that humans do have scare. Healthy humans, are they happy? Do they know how to be excited and just revel in the sheer exuberance of being a life on this earth for 80, 90 plus years? For me, I'm hoping for 85 anyway, as I hope for my wife. And do they know how to be tender and cherish and love, be kind, considerate, compassionate? Do they know how to empathize with people and then do some act of goodness that will help other people? So I leave you with Sashay. Sad, angry, scared, happy, excited, tender. The basic units if you want to be a redemptive, therapeutic person in the world.